Welcome, everyone, to Politically High Tech with your host, Elias. This is a very important political episode because if you've been listening to a couple of my audios, I've been critical of lobbyists and sometimes some of the inner workings of government, but I'm reporting from the outside, you see. But we have someone here who's gonna, I will say kindly, I might put quotes on it, depends how this conversation goes, debunk my misconceptions or my thinking, because look, I'm looking from the outside. I'm sure there's things in there that I'm not understanding or the tunes and tricks in there, but we have someone here. His name is Gene Moran, and he is a very experienced government consultant. I know he deals particularly with defense, and he got a lot of awards recently. So he's not just, I have bashed consultants before, especially when it came to the DEI stuff, because I just think they're not being very effective. But I don't treat all consultants the same. I don't paint all of them as consultants. So I'm just be very clear about that. Some are just better than others. I'm just going to be brutally honest. So he's got awards from 2020 to 2023, and I call these the pandemic lockdown years. So, just so I'm going to let him elaborate because I fear misrepresenting all of that. Disagree is different, but I don't want to misrepresent. That's not my style. So, Gene, take it away.
Hey, thanks for having me here. As you suggest, I am a consultant and a lobbyist. They go hand in hand. I help companies in the defense sector, primarily in helping them navigate the Washington environment and use tools that they might not have otherwise known are available. As we get into it, we'll talk about how funding of government contracts is really happens and how Congress has a legitimate role in that. And so there are opportunities to communicate with Congress. I've been doing this for over 20 years in some capacity or other. I'm a retired naval officer. I've been a corporate lobbyist for the last over 10 years. I've been an independent lobbyist and consultant. I help companies with not only their lobbying needs, but often with their strategic needs. It's pretty common to get into a leadership team of a company and recognize that their strategy may be out of alignment. So I try to help with that. On the side, I teach public policy at Florida State University, specifically teaching advocacy and lobbying. And so I have a perspective on this that's a bit unique in that I've seen it from the active duty military side, I've seen it from the corporate side, and I now help companies of all sizes. So that three-ring circus, as I call it, industry, agency, and Congress, is really a land of opportunity for any company. And look forward to having a conversation with you about it.
Oh, yes, I'm definitely going to look into that. I'm sure there's some I could learn from it. So, I remember we reached out to me, I said, "Oh yes, this is gold." Especially skimming through it, reading, I was like, "Oh yes, this is a kind of guest I'm definitely looking for." So great, yeah, I'm definitely going to learn something about that. Yeah, let me get into a little deeper about that. I think some people need to have a refined understanding of what is a lobbyist and what's their role in Congress and various measures.
Yeah, the headlines are fairly negative, and in some cases for good reason. Lobbying has been around since before our country was a nation. It actually stems from English times, and it's really about influencing government to achieve outcomes, whether in our case it's policy or funding outcomes. The actual conduct of lobbying is pretty well governed in this country, believe it or not. And both Congress and the Supreme Court have ruled on how lobbying is defined. And over the last 20 plus years, really since 1995, with the Lobbying Disclosure Act, which was subsequently modified in the early 2000s, requires a particular sort of transparency and reporting of lobbying activity. We can talk about campaign finance and how money enters the picture and how some of these things can be conflated with one another. But there's a general perception that there are many, many more lobbyists than there actually are. And at the federal level, there are only about 12,000 lobbyists. And that may sound like a big number to some, but if you think about the fact that there is representation across every sector of your life. So think about healthcare, any form of insurance, real estate, financial issues. We mentioned defense. Anything that you deal with has some government policy associated with it. And there's somebody looking out for what's changing in that area. It could be an association who has lobbyists who are representing your interests. So think of AARP, very, very large organization. The Postal Workers Union, the United Auto Workers, just some examples. Companies are allowed to have their own lobbyists. And this came about really in the 60s and 70s as government began to grow in size and start to influence policy more and more. Companies recognized that they needed to be involved in some of these policy issues that were being developed, and we can dig into this. But the general point I want to make is that there aren't nearly as many as people think there are. In the defense industry, there are hundreds, but there are hundreds of thousands of companies. So it gives you an idea of the relative difference. In fact, my PhD dissertation research focused on defense executives and their understanding of Congress. And what I identified was that fewer than 0.5% of defense companies actually participate in lobbying. So it's many, many fewer numbers than we might think. But the numbers can be presented in fantastical ways sometimes that make for great headlines.
Yeah, I mean, I have definitely saw a couple of headlines from mainstream media, even podcasters. For the most part, negative light for sure. Yeah, there's a lot of conflation, especially on the site, the one from, I'm not sure you ever heard of this podcast of Patrick Bet David for Valuetainment. He's growing. He's a business slash political podcaster. He's saying, he's essentially saying, lobbyists kind of influence country in a bad direction. I'm sure if you've heard that a thousands or maybe a million times for certain people. And I'm in some critical of it because obviously I'm influenced by the headlines. But since now I have a counterpoint, which is good, I always like to be challenged, especially if it's going to help me have a better understanding of life. I don't stick to my guns like, oh, lobbyists is evil. They should be abolished. I have understanding that they've been around for a very, very long time. And maybe reforms is the strongest thing I'll push for, but not abolished. It's a bit too radical. That's like kind of ripping out a very important artery of the heart. And, things are going to go haywire from there. So, I don't want
to be,
yeah.
If I could, there have been some bad actors that have correctly earned some bad press, but typically when bad actors are identified, they are in some cases tried, and in some cases they go to jail. So we've had lobbyists who have gone to jail. We've had members of Congress who have gone to jail for doing things that they shouldn't have been doing. But those numbers are very, very few. I mean, we're talking single digits. There have been lobbying reforms throughout the 2000s. About every few years, something new is added as either a reporting requirement or some change to what's allowed versus not allowed. Where I think there's room for more effort is that there are many who actually lobby, but they're not required to register to lobby because the law states that if you're in a business and you're a business executive, if more than 20% of your work effort is not going toward lobbying, you're not required to register as a lobbyist. So that leaves room for a lot of people who move through the revolving door of government, who might have had a senior role, who can advise companies. They might even be able to go meet with senior people. And this is in the legislative and executive branch. Lobbying law applies to both. They may have opportunity to, help flex their network to influence outcomes. But those individuals are not necessarily required to register as a lobbyist. So lobbying is bigger than what is reported. I will say that the lobbying law is defined by Congress. So Congress is well aware of where the lines are and what's allowed and what's not allowed. And they could change it if they wanted to change it. We get the government we elect. They have it in a particular framework today. I don't anticipate it will change too much in our lifetimes.
Right. I don't see a political incentive to change it either. So that's why I see it. Also, it's a good thing I'm learning about this. What else other stuff you want to talk about regarding? I know campaign. I know you mentioned campaign finances and other
So
process.
that's yeah, that's an area where people get confused. The Supreme Court has ruled that campaign contributions are a form of free speech, and we don't have to like that, but that is the law of the land. So people are allowed to make contributions. Companies are allowed to make contributions. There are limits and there are parameters to how much can be given to any campaign or any political action committee. For those that don't know, a political action committee is a group of people who have a like-minded interest, and they can take different forms. So a company can have a political action committee that collects contributions that have limits from individuals who are in the management levels of the company. You're not allowed to collect from hourly wage workers, and these would be voluntary contributions that are made to a political action committee. So let's just use an example. Lockheed Martin has thousands and thousands of employees. They can solicit their management team to make contributions to a common pot of money, and then a PAC board, determines where will that money be contributed to which either members of Congress or senators. This can happen at the state level. I focus on federal, but there are some rules for how that money can be distributed. Some think that lobbyists are walking around with envelopes of cash and handing it off. There may have been a time 100 years ago when that actually happened. I don't know. That is not what happens today. In fact, any contribution, either from a company or from an individual, or from one member of Congress to another member of Congress, they're allowed to make those sort of contributions. Those are all tracked. Any amount over $200 is tracked by the Federal Election Commission, and it can be reviewed by anybody in the public. It's a publicly accessible database. You go to fec.gov and you can look up by individual, by company, and you can see where money goes. You can look up a member of Congress and see who has made contributions to that member. That part is very transparent. But again, what I found in my dissertation research, part of a dissertation is to review all the literature that exists, and so I've read everything there is to read about this in Western democracies, and many studies make correlations between dollar contributions and outcomes. And when you get into statistics and correlations, you can correlate anything. But what matters is what's the degree of confidence associated with that correlation. A journalist isn't required to undergo a statistical analysis to produce a headline. So you can make a pretty eye-catching headline out of something that looks like it's something that it's not. So one has to be careful in understanding what are the real facts.
I mean, I'm getting a lesson here about my understanding of lobbyists and all of that. Well, at certain times I used to think, oh, here's 10,000, go against this bill. Here's 20,000, go against this bill. No, but that's good to know. That's why it's good to get the facts. And I'll correct myself when I'm wrong. That was my thinking. I didn't project it too much, but just like you said, journalists are not allowed to, give statistics and refine context on just their job is to generate attention with their headlines. And that means,
I think that's a valid point, that the revenue model of how news and information moves today only reinforces this bad habit, in that revenue is driven by eyes on a headline or clickable activity, if it's online. circulation was once a metric for how important is a particular newspaper. That world has changed, and the revenue model changed with it, and that to me reinforces the flow of fast moving, often incorrect information.
Yeah, but that's why misinformation is such a growing problem right there. Boom. Right there. Besides, not just them, and of course, regular users projecting their one snippet line as fact too, but I'm not gonna get into that. I want to stick to this because I'm actually getting something. Listeners, I hope you're getting this. This is something that at few times I've said some things about lobbyists, some for the most part negative light. So this is a professional counter, if you will, or hence my understanding here. I'm not going to admit I don't always get it right, but
Well,
I hope
maybe
you're
maybe I
listening.
could maybe I could help the audience just a little bit in understanding sort of how we got here. If you think about what was happening in the 70s and 80s in our country, in the 70s, regulation started to increase fairly significantly, government regulation. And as a result, government was growing bigger, and it was having an impact on corporate costs, corporate taxation. And that's when companies recognized, hey, there are policymakers making policy decisions based only on political facts. And so somebody needs to be bringing facts forward to help these policymakers more fully understand the issue. And so a very big part of lobbying is educating with facts. And we can disagree on facts, but over time, credibility will carry the day. And somebody who's found to be presenting something that's not factual won't get subsequent audiences. So, a high quality lobbyist is able to credibly bring forward information that will help a decision maker get to the best good government decision. In a perfect world, they might be able to get to an outcome that favors their company or favors their product or service, but it doesn't always work that way. And one shouldn't expect it to. All you can expect is a fair hearing and a fair opportunity to tell your version of the story.
Yeah, no, that's great. Listeners, I just hope you're getting this. This is gold here. This is gold here. Because don't expect mainstream media to give you this kind of insight. I'll tell you that much. They'll tell you the simple happy version or the simple, most of the time, negative version of this. So don't expect that from a lot of the mainstream outlets, or they just take a piece of it and greatly exaggerate it. That's how they make their headlines, like the criminal lobbyist. Oh, this one, oh, forget it. Headline, and I'm sure there's a very few of them, but they're the ones that get the most attention.
And it's understandable. And occasionally a large media outlet will do a deeper dive. But again, even academics who have looked at the overall subject, if you don't have working level knowledge of how these pieces of government fit together, you can come to incorrect conclusions. And so I came across many studies that connected things that don't really connect. There are flaws in the lobbying reporting that is required. So we file quarterly reports that state who we're working for by company name, what's the subject matter that we're working on, and how much are we being paid. Now, there are some companies who, for competitive reasons, will be a little bit obtuse about describing what exactly it is that they're working on. And they might use a very general phrase when they're actually going after something quite specific. So there are flaws in the existing system, but those are understood by those who are in it and by members of Congress who make these laws.
Yep. Yeah, now I understand why certain companies, just like say, use vague general terminology while they already have their goal. They know their goal. They're not gonna, yeah, they're gonna give you probably the tip of the iceberg. Oh, yeah, it's technology. But what are you gonna do with that technology? What kind of technological device it is, or even software or whatever? What's their specific goal? They probably, and now see why I come. You see, I have a great understanding now. Thank you. I actually appreciate that because there's certain things I'm sure I have certain pieces, but there were certain lines that weren't connecting it. I was like,
Well, you're not alone, and I have a book that's in pre-sale right now called "Government Deals Are Funded, Not Sold," and it's based on my academic research, where I interviewed defense executives about their understanding of the process into which they sell, and the overwhelming finding was that there's a complete lack of awareness of how to even engage Congress. And so we have this very simplified understanding of what is Congress's role. Some think Congress should have no say in how executive branch decisions are made. So, like, what kind of programs are we going to buy? But the reality is that our government says Congress controls the purse and Congress oversees the executive. So, if you just apply this to the normal federal budgeting process, which is a 3-year process, 2 of those years, the budget is being developed within the executive branch. It'll go through Office of Management and Budget and then go to the president. In the spring, the president will send it to Congress as a request, and then Congress puts its stamp on it. So there are opportunities both in the executive branch and in the legislative branch for associations, for companies, for individuals to approach decision makers along the way about why they believe something should be or shouldn't be. Most executives have a very, very limited understanding of how that conversation would even go, how to have a meeting, who to meet with. And Congress doesn't do a great job of explaining how to best approach them. Most offices would say, our door is always open. You can come talk to us anytime. And there are public phone directories of how to get to a main number for any congressional office. But what most don't know is that there are specific individuals within an office and then within a committee who have outsized influence over what gets discussed, what gets proposed in pieces of legislation. And if you don't understand the timing associated with that, the decision-making process that is very different in the executive branch than it is in the legislative branch. If you're just cold calling your member of Congress and hoping that they're going to help you out, you will likely have a happy phone call, but you won't find satisfaction because you showed up at the wrong place and time and you didn't have your message organized in a way that they could do something about it. I see it over and over again.
That is very valuable. This is how you get engaged. At least it's a general way to get engaged. Yeah, I could have said, "Oh, I'm here for voting reform." Well, what kind of voting reform? How does it be done more specifically, right? So it can't just, I think sometimes people just assume that when I have a request, a person's gonna understand it right away, even though if I deliver it in a very disorganized, unclear fashion. I'm assuming you to sift out the details for me. I think that's the expectations that some people got. That's why I'm trying to be more cognizant. That's why me personally, I'm trying to marinate the message so I get what I really want. If I see that's understandable enough, then I'll send it. But if I don't really understand it, I'm not going to ask for the request because if I don't understand it, there's a good chance the other person's not going to understand it. Not all the time, but there's a good chance for it.
So a couple of tools that I use, both in the executive branch and in Congress, are one is what's known as a congressional white paper, which is a single sheet of paper that tells your story. And it has 4 parts. The issue, what's the problem? The background, how did we get here? The discussion, what are the options? And you have to be fair about what the options are. There could be a competitor who has something equally valuable. And then a recommendation, the most important part. You might recommend that a particular amount of funding be applied to a specific budget line to support a specific program, or you might recommend a particular piece of policy be adjusted by just a few words. It might be less than 1 sentence, could make a big difference. But if you can command those 4 parts and then tell that story in no more than 8 minutes, you can be a hero. And here's why. If you have a Washington meeting, I don't care if it's in the Pentagon or in Congress, you will typically get a 20 or 30 minute block of time granted for your meeting. Most arrive unprepared to take advantage of that time that's been put in front of them. There are always going to be reasons that a meeting might start late. The principal might be late. You might wind up doing it in a hallway as opposed to a sit down at a conference room or a desk. But if you're ready to take command and deliver that 4-part message in 8 minutes, you can be highly effective. So you have just a little bit of time for chit chat. How you doing? You might look around the room, see if there's some photograph or something that catches your eye, where you might further develop that rapport with the individual. You start with your issue. You talk about what's the bottom line up front. What are you here to recommend? And then you acknowledge that there's some background. You acknowledge that there are other considerations via a discussion, but then you close within 8 minutes. This is something a little more complex than an elevator speech, but if you can get your points out and you're prepared to go at the top of the meeting with that 8 minutes, you allow time for questions. So let's say there are 5 minutes worth of questions, or even 10 minutes worth of questions. What have you just done? You've done the best thing that you can do for that individual, in that you're prepared now to give them time back in their calendar. So if you can give them even 10 minutes back, you're a hero, and you will stand out from anybody else. Most get up to the 30-minute mark, and then they have, just one more thing they want to squeeze in, and they go overtime. And if you can come in under time consistently, you get invited back, because they're not afraid to deal with you. They know you come in, you know your stuff, you have a tight story, you understand what they need to know, and you're not wasting their time. If you're somebody who goes in and goes long, you won't get invited back.
All right, this is very valuable. Listeners, I hope you just soaking this in like a sponge. This is one of the main things I've been saying. Now I have a 3.0 understanding. So sticking to my 1.0 self is obsolete now. This is a way to get engaged and do it effectively. Instead of going ranting. They're very busy people. It's like us regular folks. I'm sure they're very busy. So, I think that's another thing that the messenger needs to keep in mind. So that's very good. This very valuable stuff. You may not like how it's run. I get it, but this is the way to do it. If you want to be effective, I might sound a little rough here. Just shut up, learn the process, do it, and then you get your way through. Instead of just whining at first or try to get to the first base, you whine and complain, you're not going to get very far.
It is a very process-oriented government, and that's foreign to some companies, especially small companies, where they might not be so reliant on standard operating procedures. The government has this overriding mindset that they're stewards of the people, and that we want that, right? And they have those in office and those in unelected positions believe that their underlying role is to watch out for the taxpayers' money. Sometimes we have procedure that's well intended to save the taxpayer money, but it actually winds up costing much more, and that takes the form of so many regulations that are imposed on business with good intent, but with poor execution. And sometimes we see government officials who don't have business experience. They don't understand the pressure of profit and loss. They believe they do, and they truly think they understand it academically, but they haven't felt it the way a small business president would feel it. And so, acknowledging that government relies on process, they look for ways to reduce risk, and they don't want to make a wrong decision, although they're clearly capable of making wrong decisions. If you're approaching government, you need to understand these facts, and typically it's best to have a guide help you do that, at least initially. Many lobbyists, I would say the overwhelming majority of federal level lobbyists, have some form of government experience in their resumes. You have to understand how government works. It's very uncommon for a federal lobbyist to have come directly out of college. It's not that it can't happen, and it does in some of the very large firms in DC, but it's unusual. And that it's that experience with government that can make a lobbyist so effective. They understand how decisions get made, how people think, what might be the unspoken concern about a particular topic, why something looks risky, and it might need to be further explained. Those are ways or areas in which a lobbyist could help frame or reframe a particular situation for anybody approaching government.
Yep. I mean, I feel like I'm in a, well, I consider this a learning conversation for me personally, because this is definitely good. This is valuable. Listeners, I hope you're not using your goldfish attention span on this. You'll be missing out on a lot. I'm being very serious. I don't mind joking, doing all that, but this is more of a, this is time to learn and buckle down, and you know, and he has a lot of great tools. I hope you're having listened. Just put your emotions and bias aside. Do that, because this is, we do have to understand the facts. I don't care if you're Republican, independent, libertarian, whatever you land at, but just get the facts. Go ahead.
You triggered a thought that I believe we need more good people working in government. Some people perceive that you might not have the top of the academic class working in government. I could refute that all day long. There are very, very bright people with incredible credentials who are truly committed to whatever area of government that they focus on. But we need more people to recognize that there is a need for government. Certainly, we don't want too much government, and there are parts of our lives that we don't want government interfering. But somebody has to do it, and somebody has to be willing to at least man the levers of government, whatever the size of it is. And if we only see the negatives that are associated with these, relatively few who seem to have trouble following the law, then that would be a mistake. If I think back to when I was a young child, President Nixon in his day, was seen to have done some pretty bad things to the point that he had to step down. Well, that affected generations in how they thought about government. And you could make similar observations since then about mistakes that sometimes get made in government. It's easy to think that the whole place is corrupt, and we use the term swamp pretty loosely. We all have issues with how government works. Yet we do have a vote. We don't exercise our vote nearly to the degree that we could and should. The voting, the percentage of the citizenry eligible to vote who actually vote is historically below 30%. That could change things. And we never think that our local person is the problem. So we also, over 80% have a low opinion of Congress, but nearly 60% think that their particular member of Congress is doing quite well. So there's a disconnect there.
Oh no, that's a very, very, very profound point. Yep, they think their particular person. So maybe he's thinking, oh, maybe he's that Democrat in that next district over there, or maybe it's that other person in the other state. Well, it's up to that district if they like that candidate, especially the House of Representatives in particular. If that very red county likes, let me just use Marjorie Taylor Greene because she gets a lot of bad press. If they think she's doing a great job, she's going to stay there. Because it's what that district thinks. It's not what New York thinks. It's not what California. It's not even what the other red state, the North Dakota, South Dakota thinks. It's what that particular region. And I'm sure, well, the Senate, they need more of a state appeal. But for the state, for Charles Schumer, for example, he's my senator. It doesn't matter what California thinks. It doesn't matter what Texas thinks. It matters what New York thinks and how they vote. And, so.
And, if you
I do encourage them to vote. And I don't want to be absolutely clear. I don't want no government abolishment. I do see there's a need for government. The most I'll push for is reform, not abolish. That's too radical. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
The design of our government was just so incredibly clever, and in retrospect, we can see that clearly. But think back to those founders who were deciding how to establish the rotations of senators, and a 6-year cycle that's split among 3 different classes of senators, so that they only a third will rotate out or in any cycle. The House of Representatives being reelected every 2 years means they by design have to be closest to the people. They don't have the luxury to be able to sit and ponder an issue. They have to be responsive to their constituency. The cleverness required to come to that process was just profound. It's easy to throw rocks at any one individual, but I believe, just from my interaction across the ideological spectrum, Republican, Democrat, House, Senate, when you meet with them individually, their hearts are generally and genuinely in the right place. They want to do well. We don't have to align to their political beliefs, but they are very attuned to their constituency. And so some of the firebrand names that we do see, both in the House and the Senate, they know who votes for them, and they're attuned to that. So they're responding to that. So there are people who have some of these beliefs that are, some might say extreme, but that's the beauty of our system. We can all have these opinions, and we can voice them without fear of retribution.
Yep, that is. I do have to show appreciation more often. I tend not to do that. I tend to get to the crit of the weeds and all that. No, I'm being brutally honest. And I mean, this is why I don't mind. I don't mind different guests for all points of view. It's like, that's very true. I mean, our government is designed well, and I don't want any abolishment or supremely radical changes because it's going to be so disruptive. I'm sure there's consequences I could see and not foresee. So no. Yeah. So like I said, government reform is the furthest thing I will push. I don't want, abolish the executive branch, abolish the Congress. How's this large country going to run? Do you have an alternative? Very quick alternative? I don't think so.
This goes back to Greek and Roman times. We figured out a long time ago that we need something.
Exactly. No, yeah, we need something. So look, government is needed. I'm not gonna be, if you want to call me a leftist for that, that's perfectly fine. What do I care? I've been hurled to greater insults than that, and I have thick skin, so I'm not gonna entertain that right now. So let me get to the more in military industrial complex or defense contracts, wherever you want to frame it. A lot of, I mean, especially some people on the right, certain people on the left saying, military industrial complex is corrupt, they control the contracts, they bloated. I mean, what's your insight / opinion on that?
Yeah, well, there definitely is a military industrial complex, and this was seen coming out of World War II as an issue. It is very much with us. Over time, conditions of government and economic factors have caused a consolidation of the very large primes. There was a time we had over 50. Today we have 5. If you look at the size of companies that fit that top 5, and then how quickly it drops off in terms of how big companies are, it's a pretty dramatic drop. If you look at the top 200 federal contractors, that number 200 is roughly a $1 billion company, and that's a big difference from a 50 or 60 or $70 billion company. What we see is that those very large primes become absolutely expert at how the processes work, both in the executive branch and in the legislative branch. And they work the process. And they have people who are able to devote full-time energy to any program that they're working on in both a executive branch fashion and legislative branch. There's somebody who's the touch point, or some people who are the few touch points associated with a particular program. Smaller companies don't have that bandwidth. So we get this systemic disadvantage that only continues to grow. and there's a real aggregation. If you picture a pyramid of what the industrial base looks like in defense, at the very top are the large primes. That's about 5 companies. And then if you were to go down, excuse me, one more block in a pyramid. So picture a pyramid that has 4 pieces to it. Top is 5 large primes. The next block is about 35 companies. Those are the next largest. So the top 40 companies get half of the acquisition dollars. Go down to the next level, and or I should say, jump down to the bottom. At the bottom are the small business set asides. 25% of all contracts, 23% technically, of all defense contracts are supposed to be designated for small business. That amounts to about 60,000 companies per year. But then that third group that I left out there, so I went top, second, and I jumped to the bottom. That one in the middle, that's several 100,000 companies that are in the 27% range, who are competing in the free and open market. And it's an incredibly competitive space, and very hard to break into. Our industrial base has been contracting for over 5 years. It was heightened in the time of sequestration. We lost a lot of companies who could not endure the gaps between contracts that came about with sequestration. The pandemic furthered that shrinkage that occurred. Supply chain constraints are hampering the industrial base as well, and now we're putting additional laws on how the supply chains will be allowed to perform, meaning we want everything to be Buy America, and we want to limit our access to foreign markets. That comes with a price, and the price is that if companies can't provide a supply chain that'll support their product, they can't deliver the good or service at a cost that the government will buy. These pieces all interrelate, is what I'm trying to say, and it quickly becomes a real challenge. So we have this contracting industrial base. We have primes who are winning in an inordinate way, and it's a very tough system to break into. A lot of regulation is put on companies who want to participate. Cyber requirements, accounting requirements, program management requirements, just to name a few. They all have costs, and many of those costs are expected to be borne by the company providing the good or service. Personally, I think small businesses should have some way to get some government help with cyber compliance. Cyber is the issue of our day. Cyber attacks are occurring in the thousands and tens of thousands of times per day. If you don't believe that you have been hacked in some way, you are mistaken. Because there's a national security concern with the loss of data and loss of intellectual property, I think that makes it a government issue, and small businesses should be provided some relief so that they can comply with cyber hardening requirements. Let me stop there and see if I triggered any thoughts for you.
No, that is fascinating. You mentioned cybersecurity. This is the political segment, but I also do a technological segment. So there's already a very, very easy intersection right there. And I don't want to sound like a woke leftist, but this is a real organic intersection. Yeah, no, I've been talking about some cybersecurity and AI stuff because I think I'm sure they're growing. They are not going away. I will be sorely mistaken or be very stupid, to be quite frank, if I'm sure these attacks are just expanding more. So I think people need to be more vigilant. I mean, I'd be more vigilant of that. I won't be surprised I was touched one way. I mean, I was touched a few ways. I had a fight and I mean, me personally, I've been hacked a few times with my bank cards. So how these crazy people got my information. So yeah,
They're real. Pretty clever. They're pretty clever.
Yeah. No, yeah, that they are. I thought I was clever. Nope, not I was hacked.
Like, well, and just because you don't read about the major name brands being subject to attack, it doesn't mean it doesn't happen. If a company like Microsoft can be hacked, if the entire government office of personnel management can be attacked, and anybody can be attacked, and to think otherwise, I think is foolish. That's why I think it's a national security concern, and I think there should be some government relief to companies. This would be a good use of government funds to help companies harden their own systems.
I absolutely agree. See, this is a need for government people. Just abolish government and just rely on ourselves. Look, we can't do everything ourselves. We're gonna need, some government assistance. I mean, I lean very centrist when it comes to government needs. I don't think it should be too bloated, but I don't think it should be so small to the point that it's ineffective. To me, I personally think we need to find that right balance. If it's going to expand, it's going to have to expand meaningfully, like cybersecurity. I'm sure there's offices and departments for that already. That's a meaningful expansion for me. Not just expand just because I don't know what DEI stuff I don't care for, even though I'm labeled as a minority myself, because they're not very helpful. Those are consultants and certain lobbies I just happy to bash because their interest in language is not my main concern. It's about safety like cybersecurity or physical violent attacks or things like that. To me, that's more my concern. And we do need government. We do need government in some capacity. That's my point. You know, make sure it's yeah, polish the design. Hopefully, but it's never going to be perfect because it's too many competing ideas, ideologies are vying for that. Not just a free market space, even ideologies. They so and some might win, some you might win, some you might lose some.
But it's also part of our greatness, right?
Right.
I've had the privilege to travel extensively. I've been to over 60 countries. I escorted congressional delegations around the world, traveled the world as a Navy captain commanding ships. I've seen what other governments can be, how they are to live within. And, we have tremendous opportunity in this country. There's a reason we have an immigration problem. People want to come to this country for a good reason.
Oh yeah, for the most part, yeah. I believe most of the immigrants I want to come here are good people. That part I have said multiple times. Obviously, the process and all of that, and government's messaging is where I have more of a issue with. And don't get me wrong, very few bad apples will go through the border too, but I think the bad apples get way too much attention. As much as I would like to continue on, let me do some shameless plugging for you. You already got you already referred to your book. Government deals are funded, not sold. You also have the $1 million influence, capital currency, and then for the older stuff, pitching the big top, make your move. That's also a podcast too, by the way. 8 must know elements of the federal cell. So he does speaking engagements as well. There's federal government funding, policy change. He already went through that. And his website, let me make sure I get the homepage, is GeneMoran.com. That's spelled GeneMoran.com. Okay. If there's anything else you want to plug in?
I think you covered the waterfront there. Thanks so much.
No, not a problem. It's great talking to you. I've learned a lot.